The first Beast of Reincarnation trailer was a surprise on many levels. I mean, Game Freak, the Pokemon people showing up on the Xbox Showcase, announcing a new game for every modern platform except the Nintendo Switch 2 sounded crazy back then and still sounds kinda crazy now, even after it's been released. But even if I ignored the industry context and focused on the contents of the trailer, there was plenty to draw my attention. A sci-fi post-apocalyptic action RPG with heavy Nier Automata vibes, feudal Japanese aesthetics and a dog companion. What's not to love about it? It really seemed right up my alley to the point it became a day one purchase for me. Now, after about 40 hours of gameplay spread out slightly over a week, I'm here to tell you about it. All the technical issues I had, the fun gameplay and interesting but not quite well executed story I experienced, and whether or not I think it's worth buying at full price. Starting with the technical aspect, it's made in Unreal Engine 5 with all the usual implications, but even within UE5 titles, Beast of Reincarnation feels really rough on PC. It doesn't have a shader pre-compilation step when you open it for the first time, meaning you are likely to have your first few minutes of gameplay completely ruined by low frame rate, stuttering and popping as your CPU struggles to compile everything on the fly. Things settle down after a while, but you still experience the occasional hitch when entering new areas, something that happened to me all the way to the ending of the game, which, as you would expect, was a major detraction from the actual experience. Their DLSS implementation is also full of issues, which became particularly evident during cutscenes. I saw a lot of ghosting and these weird outlying artifacts that happen whenever the algorithm seems unable to distinguish between characters and the background, and Emma looks particularly fuzzy on the inventory screen. There's no DLAA option or frame generation support, and if you aren't in red, no FSR4 either, though Game Freak has announced it will be coming in a future patch. There's no ultrawide support or FOV slider, which you can at least fix by installing a mod, and the game features some rather heavy fingering effects and an option to lower the frame rate to 24 during cutscenes, probably as a way to make it look more like a movie. I'm not saying that's bad, but if you're like me and don't like that sort of thing, make sure to set post-processing to low and cutscene frame rates to performance. If you are planning on using the game's native HDR implementation, keep in mind that the brightness settings aren't very good at giving you the feedback you need to ensure a good experience, but there's a very helpful Twitter post by user HDR Game Analysis which, among other things, measured the peak brightness output of the game according to different slider positions. Make sure to set it to roughly match your monitor's capabilities and check out their posts for more information. It's not all bad though. You can fully rebuy their controls even on a controller. The camera sensibility options are very granular to the point of even allowing you to change horizontal and vertical sensibility for your mouse, and you can even set your preferred controller symbol style between PlayStation, Xbox and Switch. In terms of gameplay, this is a fairly standard action RPG. I've seen a lot of people comparing it to Sekiro and Stellar Blade, but really, in my mind, Beast of Reincarnation is better described as Ghost of Tsushima without the open world aspect. You see, while all of these games place a rather heavy emphasis on parrying melee attacks, and Emma's grappling abilities are pretty much equal to Sekiro's, Beast of Reincarnation has a generous ranged combat and stealth system that allows you to heal or severely weaken most enemies, even bosses, before they even get a chance to attack you. You can carry a lot of ammunition, get it replenished for free every time you rest in a campfire, and unlock several skills and equipment that essentially turn your bolts into a swarm of angry wasps stinging your enemies over and over again. The AI is unable to deal with that for the most part, and it's very easy to cheese normal enemies by standing on a ledge and shooting them over and over again. Which brings us to the freedom of movement. Emma can sprout roots out of her feet to extend the height of her jumps, and create temporary platforms allowing you to explore in ways you don't usually see in other games. Moving around the environment feels good and allows you to approach combat encounters from pretty much any direction, including from above. I really like that aspect of gameplay, but I wish enemies were better able to chase you around to make ranged combat more challenging. Melee combat is nothing you haven't seen before. You unslash, parry, block and dodge, and unlock several plant-based special moves that consume your entanglement bar. Enemies have a stance bar that fills up whenever you parry their attacks, leaving them open to an execution move when full. It generally felt good to play. Each enemy has a few different attack patterns for you to get used to. Parries felt very responsive, whenever the game didn't suddenly decide to throw on a new pile of shaders at least, and being able to seamlessly switch between melee and ranged weapons to keep the pressure on enemies, especially bosses, is pretty fun. I didn't really like how it felt to use Emma's special attacks though. Most of them can only be used as part of a combo after a few normal slashes, but these slashes don't really prevent enemies from attacking back, so by the time you pull off a special move, you end up trading blows with them, which really sucks if you're playing on hard and can only survive 3 or 4 attacks. So I found myself completely neglecting to use them in favor of sticking to the basic slashing and parry instead. On the other hand, Emma's dog companion is a real highlight for me. His main feature is the ability to charge up FP as you parry enemy attacks, which you can then spend anytime you want by pressing a button that slows down the action and gives you a list of special moves for him to use, in a manner not too dissimilar from some of the more recent Pokemon games. But he's a very capable companion even when you aren't directly ordering him around. As you progress through the story, you'll be able to unlock several features, abilities and consumable items for him to use on his own, leaving you free to focus on what you're doing, secure in the knowledge that he'll be supporting you as best as he can. Honestly, as far as companion actors go, he's the best I've ever seen, other than maybe companions in games like Dragon Age Origins or Final Fantasy XII, where you're allowed to heavily customize their AI behavior. Even outside of combat, he can collect items for you and will occasionally dig them out of the ground and bring them to you in his mouth. He'll even automatically craft consumable items on the fly as long as you've got the components in your inventory, leading to this really cute animation where he's very intently fiddling with something on the ground. Something that I felt was slightly annoying is that he also acts as a radar of sorts, pointing out every interactable object within a small radius. While the feature itself was welcome, listening to Emma reply to his barks by describing exactly what he found started to wear on me after a while, because there seems to be exactly one line for each type of object he can find, and it gets very repetitive.
あの光、野営地。あの光。野営地あの光野営地野営地 The equipment interface can get a bit unwieldy later in the game, as you acquire Spirit Stones for Emma and Charms for U. The main issue is that Game Freak decided to go with a console-friendly list style of interface with large icons and text that works fine while the list is small, but just doesn't when it gets any larger than like 20 items or so. You can solve that on Emma's side by selling off Spirit Stones you don't plan on using, but you can't do the same for Charms, forcing you to scroll through literally hundreds of them, including the early game junk that you'll never need again every time you find a new one. Other than that, it's a fairly simple system. New weapons, armor and ammunition types are rather rare, and their upgrade paths are very straightforward. Though it's interesting to note that the game is set up in a way that means you have to be somewhat careful about what you upgrade, since you are unlikely to get anywhere close to maxing out everything unless you spend a long time grinding. Another cool aspect of combat is how heavily it leans on elemental weaknesses and status effects. There are a bunch of different elements, fire, acid, lightning and so on, and along with the expected damage, they'll also cause a status effect build-up just like in Dark Souls. Different enemies have different elemental weaknesses, and preparing yourself to exploit them can make a significant difference in battle, especially against bosses. Lastly, there's a small slice of life aspect to the game. First, you'll find different types of ingredients while traveling, which you can purify at a campfire and eat to replenish Emma and U's hunger meter. Not like in a survival game, mind you, but rather as a way to slowly regenerate your health in between fights. If you don't eat these ingredients, you can bring them back to the Bauera, your mobile base, and cook them for permanent status increases.
In the Bauera, you interact with Brad, who acts as your handler during missions, and Agora, a little girl who spends her time managing the Bauera's small hydroponic farm and cooking for you. Bringing back books, seedlings, and ingredients to upgrade everyone is a simple yet satisfying way to progress. The game world is divided into several small zones, each with its own unique theme and visual identity. They look good and include some rather impressive architecture mixed in with all the wilderness. While you are free to run around to take it all in and find extra items and side content, the main story path is rather short and repetitive, which is perhaps the weakest part of the experience. I was satisfied with the enemy variety and really liked their visual design, but boss fights follow a very simple, uninspired pattern that felt like a disservice to the gameplay. They are mostly overrun versions of a normal enemy that behave almost exactly like them, with the addition of 1 or 2 plant-based special attacks that you can unlock for Emma and O after defeating them. Boss battles almost always happen in open, featureless circular arenas that don't allow for much variety in how you tackle them, and the few exceptions, while welcome, don't really make up for all the rest. So, all in all, Beast of Reincarnation is a mostly competent, familiar sight to anyone who's played any action RPG made in the PS4 and PS5 generations, with the genuinely great addition of a companion character that actually feels useful, but dragged down by the lackluster boss fights and occasional stutter. The story is fine. I'll go into deeper details later, but for now here's a quick, spoiler-free summary. Dragon Age Origins. No, seriously, if you've played Dragon Age Origins, it's the same basic setup along with a bit of Nier sprinkled in. There's a blight spreading throughout the land, mutating and erupting nature and humans alike. The few blight-touched humans who survive gain special powers and the ability to survive close contact with the Nushi, massive mutated beasts that spread the blight whenever they build their nests, and become sealers, tasked with healing them in order to keep the few surviving human colonies safe. Every 100 years or so, the Beast of Reincarnation, the source of all that corruption, is reborn and makes its way to the capital, threatening to destroy all that is left of human civilization, and now, in the year 4026, the sealer Emma receives a direct order from the capital's administrator to hurry and stop it before that happens. But to become powerful enough to challenge the beast, she has to first travel throughout Japan, defeating as many Nushi as possible and absorbing their powers. It's a good enough setup, and I liked the overall story on a macro level, especially when it starts tying together all of the different characters and concepts, but in my view it is harmed by two major issues. First, the game suffers from a very Hollywoodian approach to script writing, which is to say a huge emphasis on creating emotionally impactful situations without the due air to actually set them up properly or even make them make sense in the first place. While that can certainly work in an action game, it did for Ghost of Tsushima at any rate, the voice acting and editing direction fails to transmit that emotional impact in any meaningful way. Dialogue scenes consist of characters standing around motionless, expressionless, with only their lips and heads moving, which feels really uncomfortable to see in a realistic-looking game, like watching wax sculptures trying to come alive, draining away much of the drama that would otherwise arise from the situations Emma and the others find themselves in. Second, the writers keep resorting to the same handful of plot devices throughout the game, making the moment-to-moment story highly predictable. I won't go into details so as to avoid spoiling anything, but for example, the number of times Emma ends up collapsing in a cutscene quickly reaches the double digits. The two aspects that really help carry the experience are the soundtrack, which reminds me a lot of Nier, and the post-apocalyptic feudal Japan aesthetics, which combine to set the tone of this de-aged society that is constantly fighting a losing battle, hanging on to the last few scraps of a golden age long past, but they don't make up for these issues. They just give me something pretty to look at and listen to while killing golems and infected animals. Now for the next section, I'd like to dive a little deeper into the story and characters so I can be a bit more specific on what I did and didn't like. That of course requires me to enter spoiler territory, so consider this your spoiler warning. If you don't want any spoilers, skip to the next chapter where I'll wrap up the video with a few final thoughts. The first big antagonist you meet is a rival sealer going by the name of Shido, and defeating him awards you with a few early hints as to what's really going on. That's fine, except Shido is everything that I hate in villain writing. Emma fights him 3 times. In the first, he eats her ass in a cutscene after the boss fight ends, which is a bad enough design decision, spares her life even though his goal required him to kill her, then leaves, fully aware that Emma is only going to get stronger. He then shows up later to finish the job and actually loses, but runs away in a cutscene, flabbergasted by the obvious consequences of his past decisions. Later, you run into him a 3rd time and he finally loses for real in an emotional cutscene where he curses his fate. Now, the reason why he needed to kill Emma is because he had a pet Nushi just like Wu, except it was inhabited by his dead sister's spirit and, by consuming Emma's body, she would be able to take it over and be reborn as a human. But the thing is, Shido and his sister are both inhabitants of the space station Shambhala, which serves as digital storage for souls and routinely transfers them back down to Earth in mass-produced bodies just like Emma's, and in fact, not only there are a bunch of Shido lookalikes roaming all over the place, there's even a spare female body lying around in a nearby facility, which he certainly would find out about if he looked hard enough. And that's without even going over the fact that he decided not to take the chance to go through with it the one time he held Emma's fate in his hands. But no, he just had to be all edgy and brooding and stupid because that makes for a whole final confrontation. The second enemy sealer, Unai, and the Beast of Reincarnation itself have similarly poorly thought out plans, but I don't want the spoiler section to be longer than the entire rest of the review, so long story short, it all goes back to what I said earlier, where most of the writing seems to prioritize emotional impact over actually making sense. Which is a real shame because I really like how the setting is essentially an ultra-tech take on Buddhist concepts, which I know very little about but find fascinating. It's just the kind of thing that I love, from the basic idea of a technological marvel taking on religious contours, to the way golems and other more standard sci-fi machines serve as a distraction from the really advanced bioengineering stuff, to Shambhala as a space station housing countless digitized souls in their servers, waiting for a chance to come back down to Earth and experience life again, and how they contrast against the rest of humanity being locked into this daily struggle for survival out in the colonies. I can't help feeling that there was some real inspiration put into Beast of Reincarnation that unfortunately, due to any number of factors, failed to reach its full potential. They're certainly fun to be had if you enjoy action RPGs in general, and I think Wu should be held up as a prime example of how to implement companion characters in a video game, but all the technical issues, competent but not great combat system, uninspired boss fights, and disappointing story make it impossible for me to recommend at the current price of $60, not when there are so many other great action games recently released or expected to release soon for the same price. If you are subscribed to Game Pass though, it's totally worth a try. Play through the first area, fight the first Nushi, and see if you enjoyed that enough to repeat over and over again until the end of the game. With that said, I really hope Game Freak continues trying out new ideas instead of slaving away in the Pokemon mines for all eternity. Beast of Reincarnation is competent enough, and the setting imaginative enough, that it would easily pave the way to something greater if they try again, this time benefiting from all the lessons learned while developing it. If anything, the fact that the game originally defaulted to using film grain and 24 FPS cutscenes tells me someone, probably high up on the team, had a very strong vision on how Beast of Reincarnation should be experienced, and even though I personally disagree with them, I believe this kind of passion and willingness to go against common sense is always a positive in any creative industry, even when it doesn't quite work out. But that's enough from me for now. That was a video review for Beast of Reincarnation from Game Freak, available for $60 on Steam. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, welcome any feedback you may have. Bye bye!